Hey guys, in this video I'll be outlining some methods in VCV rack using 8-bit analog to digital converters and bit manipulators to generate rhythm for your generative patches. These methods can generate a wide variety of rhythmic patterns, but particularly excel at erratic, ornamental sequences. Before we dive into the technique, first let's go over the basics of how an analog to digital converter works. Okay. First, we need to understand the difference between an analog signal and a digital one. Analog signals are continuous voltages and can be represented by numbers like 5 volts, 2.34587 volts, and so forth. When we see an analog signal on an oscilloscope, we'll see a continuous line. Digital signals are not continuous voltages. On an oscilloscope, we will have a signal with little ridges or bumps in it, or bits of distortion called steps. This is because the digital realm operates based on unique combinations of zeros and ones. For example, the combination 001 could equal 1 volt, while 011 could equal 2 volts, and so on and so forth. This graph here shows this relationship of bits and voltage level. As you can see though, the graph is stepped and the signal is not continuous. This is the catch in all of this. The series of bits cannot represent every single voltage level in a continuous signal, because that would go to infinity. The results in digital signals, all being inherently stepped like this, are not true representations of the analog signal. Now you may be wondering, we are in VCV rack, which is all digital. How do we have analog looking signals like that LFO or VCO right here on the scope? Well, that's because sampling technology has gotten so good in modern times that we can digitize a signal so that it's practically indistinguishable from an analog signal when heard as audio. How can we use this concept to make music? Well, this module by Count Modula is an 8-bit analog to digital converter, this other one being a digital to analog converter with individual outs and ins for each of the 8 bits. This is a 8-bit analog to digital converter. Modern ones go from 16, 24 to 32, which is much higher quality. These bit outs on the ADC act as gates, as 1 equals a high voltage and 0 being at no voltage. And if the voltage fed into the ADC progresses slowly enough, such as an LFO, the gates will be slow enough that they can trigger things in your patch. Now, let's look at this on the scope real quick. So here I have my sine wave into the X input, and I went ahead and offset it below so we can see the other version after I plug that in. So I'm going to take my sine wave from the VCO, which is supposed to be analog, so it's supposed to be a continuous signal. I'm going to plug it into my ADC. As you can see, the individual outs in the ADC are plugged into the individual ins of the DAC. We can take this out, put in the Y in. As you can see, we can already see a big difference in the waveform. It's been kind of clipped at the bottom, and it's, not really looking like a sine wave anymore. And we can use these knobs right over here, the level, reference, and bit number, scale, and offset, and all that, to further distort the waveform. Level will just take down the level of the input signal, making it into a flat line. Reference changes the reference voltage of what 1 bit is, so it'll kind of make it more into a square wave when we take it down. We can also change the amount of bits it converts the analog signal into, from 8 all the way down to 2. Now, if we mess with the DAC, we'll actually get some pretty interesting distortions. If we take the bit down, we'll get some weird stuff going on with our sine wave, a lot of distortion. Take the scale down, nothing really. Offset, not much. But as you can see, this is kind of an interesting way to further distort your waveforms. And if we plug an LFO into it, let's quickly do that. Oh wait, wrong one. Again, a sine wave. Here we have one at the top. I can go ahead and do that. Plug it into X. We can, shape it like that. Same thing. We can distort it. Make it into a square wave. And of course, if this goes slow enough, if you look right over here on this ADC, suddenly these gates are slow enough that they can probably trigger things like drums, voices, effects, etc. Now, let's get into our second effect right over here next to these count modula modules. And that is this rabbit, which is described as a bit manipulator. And the bit manipulator really, it operates on the principle of bit masking. Bit masking being basically a manipulation of bits, turning ones into zeros, zeros into ones, etc. And on this module, you have the option to turn a bit off from 1 to 0, or to reverse the bit, either from 1 to 0 or 0 to 1. And these are all voltage controllable, as you can see here, or toggleable with your mouse. This bit manipulation offers a much more wide variety of distortion options compared to the ADC and DAC option, with just really the out bits being the only thing that'll distort a lot. Let's see how it looks like on a VCO. And this is also a stereo module, so you can do stereo processing in it, which is pretty great. Take our VCO, put it in. As you can see, it looks like a sine wave. As we start turning off bits, you'll see a lot of distortion in the signal, and it being offset around. If we reverse them, we'll also get a bunch of distortion. Some really crazy stuff, as you can see, with a lot of little distorted bits, little fringy things on the side. Very cool waveforms. And the thing is, this is all voltage controllable. So you could make a sequence out of this timbral change. Or if the wave is slow enough, like in an LFO, it will actually, let's see. There we go. It will actually produce a waveform that can be scanned by comparators, and you can produce gates from this, making it into a weird rhythmic pattern. And if you haven't seen my video on comparators using comparators to generate gates, I'll leave the link in the description. It's a very good video, and it really opens up the possibilities of what you can use to make rhythm with. All right, now let's get into the patch. All right, so now we're here with the ADC module and this kind of drum bass patch that will be used to demonstrate the kind of hocketing you can do with its gate outs. All right, now I'm gonna do a quick rundown of the modules we have here before we start. We have our LFO, which is gonna be our main waveform that we're gonna scan on the ADC. We have a clock divider, which we'll use later. VCA for that waveform, the LFO one. It'll become important later. ADC, we have a kick drum with a distortion on it, a rim module, FM drum generator, snare, hat, mixer, a sequential switch, and 2 8-step sequencers for our bass that'll make it more interesting, quantizer, VCO, VCF, ADSR, VCA, and that is it. All right, now this is how we start the patch. We're going to take this triangle here. You can take whatever waveform you want, but we're going to use a triangle. Put it into our VCA. Take the out of the VCA into the ADC. Now, the reason it's going into the VCA first is because a very hot signal into the ADC will get us some very erratic, crazy gates that are super fast and crazy. So it's good to have that control over how crazy you want it. And as you can see from these little lights here, we already have a bunch of rhythms going. Now, let's just take maybe the second bit and trigger the kick drum. There we go, we already have something interesting. We can take 3, maybe do FM drum. Nice. 4 snare. 5 hat. 1 I'll put into this clock divider, which is going to our rim claves here. I'm just dividing it by 2. It's pretty crazy when you don't divide it by 2. So 2 is nice. We already have something pretty interesting here. And if we mess with the LFO speed, we Get like slower speeds, VCA. Get some different rhythms, different hocketing. Yeah, you get some pretty interesting stuff. Like the rhythmic patterns are fairly long, and they are not always symmetrical. Some of them have odd meters to them. It's quite interesting, actually. See, like there, like that's kind of wicked. Now let's add the bass into here. Let's see. So what we need to do is we need to trigger our sequencers and our ADSR, and we could just use more gates, honestly. Be one here, and then one here. So I have one going into the ADSR, two into the step sequencers to advance the sequence in the step sequencer, and then I have a clock from the LFO going into our sequential switch, which is switching between the sequencers. Not that bad. Let's try to change the clock sources, maybe. Something a bit faster. Interesting stuff. Get this kind of very lilting rhythm here in this setting. It's some interesting stuff. Like, I would definitely try to add an ADC in a lot of my drum patches. Maybe not for all the drums, but for some of them, because you get some really interesting rhythms. Maybe on like a clave or a hat rhythm. This would be a really cool module to have. But you can also run an entire patch on it like we're doing here. The entire song is being generated by this ADC from an LFO. And of course we can also change the waveform, go to assign. Assign, we get much more lilting, as you can see. And I bet if we messed with like some offset, we would get some interesting results, actually. Let's put it in here. Oh, interesting. Nice. But yeah, some interesting stuff. Now let's get over to the bit masking / manipulator module. All right, I just want to show you one more example of that drum patch, this time in a less experimental patch where everything is being generated by the ADC. This one we have the drums and the synths being triggered by just regular clocks and trigger sequencers. And only the clap is being triggered. Actually, excuse me. The clap and our clouds right over here is being triggered by the ADC. Okay, let's unmute this thing. That's our basic drum pattern right there. As you can see, it's being, triggered by the trigger sequencer. Here's our bass voice. Kind of basic. Let's add in our high synth. And you can see here on this output 1, it's being triggered. The clouds is being triggered by the ADC. Now let's add in our clap. And our clap is being run through this delay module right over here. And as we can see, the ADC outs are going into the sequential switch, which is going and triggering this clap module. So now I can switch between what bit I want. Get different rhythms. One is actually from the trigger sequencer. Kind of cool to perform with this, just like mess around with it, get different syncopations. We can also mess with the VCA too. Get pretty crazy with it. Turn off the delay maybe. This is it without the delay. I think it sounds a bit better with the delay. But yeah, as you can see, we can get some pretty cool stuff with it here. It's, you know, just throwing it into one of the instruments, messing around with it. But yeah, there we go. That's just another example of it kind of in the wild. Generally, the ADC, although it can be used for drums, and we have been using it for drums for the last 2 patches, it's a little bit better with hocketing synth voices, mostly because it isn't, the ADC isn't super grid-like in its rhythm generation. You'll get some really weird and off beats that just don't groove very well. And as you can see with the last 2 patches, I was able to make it work. But you might also want to try just using those gates to trigger like rings or trigger ADSRs and all that, and voices and all that. It's very natural sounding. Hello. So this is the 3rd ADC patch that I want to run through. This one isn't with drums, it's with a synthesizer, the Platts module. It's already going right now. So let me just break it down for you so we know what we're looking at. Off screen, we have an LFO going to the VCA, the VCA going to the ADC. That was in the last 2 patches. We've already seen that. Now we have all of the 8 bits of the ADC going into the sequential switch. The out of that is going into our sample and hold, triggering it, but also triggering our rings module. Oh yeah, I think I said Platts earlier. I meant rings. It's a rings module. And then the sample and hold, all it's doing is it's providing random notes that goes into our offset and scale module, which is basically the Bifaco A times B plus C. And that into our quantizer, which is going into our rings. And the rings is going to our mixer off screen. And with this select knob, I can select each step within the sequential switch. And using that, I can kind of perform some rhythms with it. Let me show you what I mean. As you can see, you can kind of get pretty cool with it. And of course, this can accompany other things. You can put it into your other patches and all that. And of course, you can mess with the offset here and the scale. You know, get some really crazy stuff. Really low stuff. Very fun. All right, so that's another example of using the ADC. And as you can see, it just really helps creating these natural sounding kind of ornamental figures. Pretty great stuff. All right, now we have our bit manipulator / bit masking patch. This one won't be with drums, it'll be with a synth and a little bit of effects, and I'll show you how we can trigger all of them using this method. All right, now let's get a good look at our bit module right over here. Here it is, Rabbit. And as you can see, everything is voltage controllable. And we could just toggle them on and off as we, play the patch, but since it's modular, let's try to automate it a bit. And these inputs take gates to either reverse the bit or turn it on or off. And so I'm going to show you two methods to kind of to control this on this module specifically. One of them is with a trigger sequencer. And because the trigger sequencer will send gates and triggers, so we can just take the out of it into these inputs. And this one by count modular is quite handy because it has the exact number of outputs, 8, that Rabbit needs. Then we can clock it, and I'll clock it with our LFO here. And there we go. It is doing its stuff. So this is a pretty easy way to change these bits, especially since we have direct control over the triggers and all that. So we can kind of perform live as well to change the sequence. Here's another way. I'm going to use this try comparator outs module to kind of send more gates to the offside here. What we can do, we can take some random voltage, like from these two sample and hold modules here, put them into our 3 ins. And all this module is doing, it's basically a comparator, but with 3 voltages, and they all have to be the same in order to, or not the same, they all have to meet the criteria of each of these gates. So one of them is being all the same, one of them is being bigger than the other, etc. And as you can see, and it kind of just generates a lot of gates for us. So we can just take these and put them in here kind of randomly. Doesn't really matter at this point, at least. So we're just trying out things. There we go. So now we are, we're off to the races. We have all of our stuff modulated. So what do we do now? We already have the LFO going into our scope here. Now let's put it into the in of our bit manipulator module, or a bit masker, and then take the out of it, put it into the scope. And as we can see, we get a really weird waveform, perfect for generating gates. And so now what we do, we take the out of that, put it into our 3 comparators. And I've already set the thresholds to something interesting and musical, and you can see that they're already generating gates. But first what I want to do is put them into this trigger converter, or gate to trigger converter for our OR module, because all of these are going into this OR module, and it's pretty much just adding all the gates. It'll basically send gates when any of these are on, and that is being sent to our ADSR and all that, and looks like it's ready to go. Now I'm gonna unmute this patch. There we go. Let's just watch it for a sec. Yeah, it is generating gates. It certainly is. All right, but we're gonna need some kind of notes here. So as you can see up here, I have my trusty A times B plus C module, our offset and attenuverter module. And I also have this random module from VCV. And we can take the stepped function, put it into our A input. There we go. And the out of it is going into our quantizer, which is going to our volts per octave in the VCO. And we can kind of mess with the level, the scale, to get different notes at different sequences. But the rhythm is all being controlled by this comparator bit masking thing. And you can hear that white noise in the background. Let's scroll down a bit here. I'm also using it to kind of control these ADSRs that are controlling the filter, which is filtering this sample of white noise I have in here. It's actually a sample of a radiator from my apartment. Very cool. But as you can hear, we got like some cool, like kind of, cool ornamental sequences going. Very nice. Can change the tempo here. Change some of our bit stuff here. slow. We can change the scale too. Pelog, nice. Ooh, that's fun. We can change the comparators. Ooh, that's nice. Very, you know, gamelan Indonesian. I like that. Very cool. But yeah, that's pretty much the method. And there are a couple more bit manipulator modules. Just, you know, go to the VCV library and search up bit and see what else you can find. This is the best one I found since it's voltage controllable. And yeah, I highly recommend trying to integrate these into your generative patches. They're very fun, and you can get some really cool sequences like this. And you can trigger anything, drums, VCOs, effects. You can trigger, I mean, the rings module, like in the beginning of the video, that's a good one to do this one with. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys.